Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Wednesday in week 9. I'm just going to say hi quickly to some people who are here before we get going. So Michaela's here, Ayushi's here. Good morning to both of you. Well, good morning Michaela and good evening Ayushi. Hello Ananda, good morning. Adil's here. Hello Adil. Hadil is here. Good morning Hadil. Shania's here. Hi Shania. Ashley's here. Good morning Ashley. And Kevin's here. Good morning Kevin. So yeah, we were just, so apparently there's an election going on, you say? Somewhere? It's no big deal? No? Just kind of a local, like, by-election that nobody cares about?
Speaking on planetary scale is local
It
election.
doesn't affect
So-
anyone except for that
I
single
know what's governed and how. I know the Senate. but-
What's what and how?
So there's like 3 voting things going on, right?
Yes.
So there's a Senate.
There's a Senate.
So there's another is House,
There's Congress or the House of Representatives.
and then there's another one.
Then there's the President.
President.
Yeah. Everybody's getting voted on. Everyone got voted on yesterday. And so now we just sit back and chew our nails.
It's like
So the last thing I
223
saw
for
last night was
Biden.
that they were tied on 209.
Well, they're not anymore.
But
They
it's
still make
not-
Trump is
They're
not
not counting like it's 213 for Donald Trump and then 223 or like 32 for Biden.
Let me
But
see.
When I saw the map, the Trump owned like most of the,
There we go. So this is,
except Delaware from all the time.
right. So this is what the Globe and Mail is reporting currently. Let me just have a look here.
What's the right side of the house? We said the right side.
Yeah, so it's a little closer than I was kind of hoping for.
It was like the difference was a lot around 10 o'clock last night, but then
Yeah.
like 10:30, Trump literally caught up.
Yeah. And the,
Looking at the map, it's a different thing.
it doesn't though. Like it looks more red, but that's because those are states with fewer people in them. So, because
They have less time.
yeah, I believe the Electoral College is population based, and so some of those states look massive, but like Nebraska takes up a big chunk of land, but it's got one electoral vote because, I don't know, I think of 1 million people in the state or whatever. Not a big state, right? So, yeah, the map can be misleading, but this is what makes the difference here.
See Trump's tweet last night?
Which
Steal the votes, we're not gonna let them,
Those
or
are the-
something like that. They
there's a lot of misinformation flowing from that side of the camp at the moment.
I mean, like, stealing, what's with the whole hostility thing?
Yeah,
Dude.
so.
What's with the whole hostility thing?
It's
There's
just an election. He's dramatic, but that's too much.
Well, I don't know that it's too much for him, right? But Trump's already been declaring himself the winner. He's already, talking about how whoever they is trying to steal the election, and he's ready to go to court and all of these things. And, nothing, as near as I can tell, nothing irregular has happened, right? Again, there's, yeah, I read the statistic yesterday, or the number yesterday, and I hope I'm not getting it wrong, but I think there are something like 100 million votes that were mailed in.
And then 7.
There's 100 million votes that have to get mailed in. I wonder what. Well, that's
It has
weird.
been hacked bad, yeah.
No, hang on.
Just for sharing statistics.
That was weird. So, yeah, so there's something like 100 million votes that have been mailed in. And so those take a long time to tally up, right? So it's going to be, might be a few days before we have a,
It might take.
probably until Friday, until we have a better picture of what's going on here. And then it may even take the better part of
Why did it get
the
stopped?
next couple of weeks. What's that?
Why the counting got stopped?
Because, why did the counting get stopped?
Dude, it was like literally
Well, that and the fact that most of these numbers come from people who voted in person, right? Because those votes are very easy to count, and they can be counted on the night. And so again, the polls closed at 11 p.m. Eastern time or something like that, and so they can get us these kind of results within a few hours. But the mail-in ones, depending on the state you live in, I don't think they can even be opened until the election starts in some cases. Some can be counted even as long as they're postmarked by the election date, they can be counted. And so some might not even be received yet. They might still be in the mail. And so
What's the difference between the House and governor?
governors are in charge of the state. The House represents the people, the people of the United States at the federal level.
How come the governor, for Trump got more votes than, in Senate they were saying?
Well,
Governors are the governors of the state.
But the Senates
The
are,
person.
under the governors, right?
yeah, their governor are basically like our premier, right? So we have John Horgan here in BC. He's the head of the province. Governors are the head of their respective states. And so the governors are kind of independent of Trump. And so, they belong to the same party, but they don't necessarily cooperate, I think. Like here in Canada, for instance, we have an NDP, or here in BC, we have an NDP premier, right? And an NDP party in power. Now, if the NDP were to take power federally, so that's Jagmeet Singh, if Jagmeet Singh became Prime Minister of Canada, he and John Horgan would probably get along really well, and they'd probably try to help each other out. But if they came into conflict, they would fight it out with each other, right? Because again, their job is to look at, so John Horgan's job is to look after BC. And so he would probably get along with Jagmeet Singh, and they would cooperate on a lot of things. But if it came to blows, then they would battle it out. That happened actually in Canada, in Alberta, when we were having a dispute over pipelines with Alberta. And so both BC and Alberta had NDP governments. So you would think they would, be all warm and fuzzy toward each other. What's that?
They're fighting.
They did fight, yeah. And because, again, John Horgan is supposed to stand up for BC. It was Rachel Notley at the time. Rachel was supposed to stand up for Alberta. And so, yeah, they were the same party and they shared some of the same values. But, if the provinces are in conflict, then the parties are in conflict as well. So here the governors are members of the Republican Party, and they're probably Trump friendly to some degree. But, they also have to look after their states. Whereas the House is kind of like our MPs in Canada, and so they represent the United States as a whole. Member of Parliament.
What if Trump gets more votes from governor and Senate, but less votes from?
Not how it works. So for governors are probably a different thing because they're state level government. The Senate and the House and the President are federal level. So the House and the President and the Senate all have different powers, and they share their power. And so that was one of the things that, I'm not an expert on this, but one of the things the American founding fathers wanted to do was they didn't want all the power in the hands of one group or one person, so they divided it up. And so the Senate has some power, the House of Representatives has some power, and the President has some power as well. And they have to work together in order to use their powers to sort of move the state forward and get things done that they need to have done. So again, if you're a Democratic president like Joe Biden and you have the House, and if you have a House majority, then things are going to be easier for you, right? Because the president and the House are going to cooperate, right? What Trump has been dealing with for the past little while is that the Democrats have had the majority in the House, and he's a Republican. So he's been battling with them because they don't want to cooperate. But he does have the Senate, right? And the Senate has been backing him up. So again, it kind of depends who takes what, right? If you're lucky enough to get all three, if you're a Democratic president and you get the House and the Senate, you're going to have a pretty easy time, and you're going to be able to get things done. If you have the other party holding one of those other bodies or the majority in those other ones, then it's going to be tougher. You're going to have to compromise more. There's going to be more arguing. It's going to be more difficult.
Canada can benefit from whom? Trump or Biden?
Personally, I don't think anyone benefits from Trump, except maybe the enemies of the United States and Western democracy. Biden.
But in the debates when Trump was, accusing, Trump was saying something about Biden, he was just silent.
I don't know. Canada's always had a pretty good relationship with the Americans, one way or the other. We've had our differences and disagreements, but for the most part, we're neighbors, we're allies, we're trading partners, and so for the most part we get along. Trump's been a little different because he's willing to, his friends and enemies are based on kind of who's done what for him lately, sort of thing, and so I don't know. It's tough to know which way it's going to go, but it's going to take a few more days before we.
Do you think if Biden wins, Trump, the people who support Trump are gonna win too and stuff?
Are they going to what?
Are like they gonna do a war or something?
Yeah, he will do something.
I don't know. I don't know that anything will happen. I mean, nothing has happened so far, and I think.
He's already accusing. Yeah.
What if he doesn't stand down? Like Biden gets elected, but Trump doesn't give up power.
There is basically I think this is a constitutional thing. I think according to the Constitution, he ceases to be president at a certain time, and I don't know if it's like I don't know if it's like December 31st at midnight or something like that, but he ceases to be the president, and so he can pack up his stuff and leave the White House, and if he doesn't, he's basically a trespasser. And if Biden wins the Electoral College, Biden will be the president, and he will probably ask the Secret Service to escort him out, right? So I think he's made a lot out of it, but I don't know that legally or constitutionally, there's not much he can really do.
But if we get the military strike, the Constitution can go
But
Well,
Trump
that's
will
that.
be-
Well, that's what a real authoritarian dictator would do to seize power, right? They would have the military behind them or some sort of military force. They would take the White House just like the Bolsheviks did, right? They would throw Joe Biden and everybody in prison, and people would protest, and they would crush the protest. They would round up any intelligent people or people who were sort of advocating for Biden or democracy and throw them in jail too. What's that? Send them to Alaska, and then probably reign of terror until everything settles down. I mean, that's what a real dictator would probably do. But again, you need some military force behind you, and Trump doesn't have that. There's no evidence that he would have that, and so I think he's going to make a lot of noise for a while. But if it comes out that Biden wins, he won't really have any recourse. He can try to take it to court, but it's going to take a long time to settle.
Are they yet counting?
What's that?
Are they yet counting?
Are they counting? Yeah, they've been counting since the moment they were allowed to start counting. They started counting. So this is going to change a little bit over the next couple days, not as quickly as we saw it changing last night, but I think maybe by Friday we'll have a closer picture of what's going on here. But it's tough because people haven't mailed in their ballots to the degree that they did this year, right? So last year, some people did because they were, it was difficult for them to vote, or they were out of the country or something like that. But most people who vote in person. But this year, because of COVID, everybody has mailed in their ballots, and that's what's slowing everything down. In a regular year, we would know already, because so few people mail in a ballot. But this year, it's going to take some time to figure out. unfortunately. So we all just get to sit on the edge of our seats and bite our nails and hope that what we want to happen actually happens.
The newspaper, everyone have different opinion on that newspaper.
Well, yeah, there's different opinions out there for sure. But again, you just have to wait until the votes are counted, right? Nobody knows how it's going to come out until it's over. I mean, it looks a certain way here, but again, it's a lot closer than I thought it was going to be.
So you thought Trump would get less votes?
I'm not sure if I thought it or I hoped it. I did hope it. Part of me is surprised that it's so close, and part of me is not, because if you look at the map, so few states actually flipped. So states that traditionally elected or voted for a Republican president still did, and Democratic states still voted Democrat, and so everything is so polarized at the moment that really nothing, like it's shocking, but nothing has changed it, right? Like this, a president like Donald Trump, a pandemic, nothing has changed people's political views, which is shocking and concerning. But hi, Amanda.
So what happened last election is that Hillary owned by votes, but she lost by the electoral.
No, yeah, she lost by these. She technically had more votes, so she won the popular vote, but she lost the electoral college. And this is the electoral college. You can see the votes down at the bottom there. It's about 69.7 million to 67.1 million. So,
Oh, that's close.
what's that?
That's close.
In a country of 300 million people, yeah, it's pretty close, right? So the popular vote is close, but again, the popular vote doesn't really much matter.
100 million voted.
Huh?
On the 100 million people voted.
We don't know how many people voted yet. I heard there was 100 million ballots in the mail. There's 300 million people in the United States.
So
300
1 of 3 people voted.
Huh?
1 of 3 people voted.
More than that. More than that.
300.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't think they know what the voter turnout is at the moment because not everything's been counted. But they're expecting it to be larger than normal, and yeah, we just gotta wait. I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you. That's just what it looks like at the moment. Nothing has happened. Trump has said a lot of inflammatory and incorrect things, which is kind of par for the course for him. So
When you get a final result, just message it.
when I get a final result,
When you get a final
no, I'm not messaging. You keep an eye on it yourself. I'm not your press correspondent.
result.
Okay, let's go. Let's head back to another transfer of power, which was in the Soviet Union, right? So we were talking about the Russian Revolution here, and we were talking about it because, again, it completely altered the course of Russian history and arguably the history of the 20th century and the world. And like I said, I don't think we wind up living in the world we're living in now without the Russian Revolution. I don't think there's any way we get to where we are now without Soviet Russia. The other thing is it's the first time that this new political or economic system called communism or socialism, it's kind of the first time it's been tested in the real world, right? So it's only existed in the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. It was kind of a, wouldn't it be great if this happened? But Lenin is going to put it into practice, right? He's gonna make this thing a reality for the first time ever. Yeah, so there he is. A bit of a spoiler alert here. He's going to lead the Russian Revolution, right? He's going to be the head of the Bolsheviks. They will overthrow the provisional government. They'll jail all of those guys, and the Bolsheviks will take control of Russia in 1917. He's going to die, as you can see, in 1924. So he's not going to have a whole ton of time to do all the things that he needs to do. He's going to have, again, spoiler alert, he's going to have a series of strokes in sort of the last years of his life, and that's going to make it more difficult for him to kind of run the party and give speeches and things like that, and eventually they're going to need a successor. But before we get to him, so before the revolution, we said that there was a provisional government in place that was trying to kind of organize itself and draft a constitution. The Tsar had stepped down, right? And so the country looked like it might be on the path towards maybe a democratic republic. Who knows? Things looked pretty good for a moment. But then, of course, Lenin is back, right? So this provisional government drives him out of Russia because they think he's a revolutionary and a danger to the state, which is correct. That's exactly what he is. They call him a German spy. He's not. But they label him that way in order to kick him out of the country. And so he flees to Finland, but later he will be sent back in with the help of the Germans, interestingly, and he'll show up again. He's sort of trying to rally the people around this peace, land, and bread idea, right? So peace in terms of he will get them out of the war, land in terms of he will create a system so that the peasants can have land, which they don't have right now, and bread, right? He will somehow fix the sort of food shortages that Russia has been experiencing for, years now, right? So he promises these three kind of simple things. And he has the support of, I guess I'm jumping back here. I'm going to jump forward. So he has the support of, we've seen all this before, so that's why I'm jumping through it. There we go. He has the support of his Bolshevik party, of course. He has the support of the Moscow and the St. Petersburg Soviets, right? And who are the Soviets? Again, Soviet.
Yeah, the union, like workers' union. Some people, they showed up and they started to run cities.
Yeah, they're kind of like an informal workers' union, right? And so we said things were chaotic. Clearly the Tsar is not doing his job running the country, or he's off, fighting a war, while Rasputin is, this sort of mystical faith healer is controlling the Tsar's wife. And so, the country's going a heck in a handcart, as they say. And so these workers' councils kind of appear to run the cities and try to, kind of administer them and organize, the police and the fire and the mail and anything else, right? So these workers' councils are elected, right? So they elect members. They sort of meet in a council and they decide what to do. And the people of these cities support them because they're, at this point, just thankful for any kind of leadership and organization that is shown, right? And so these guys show up, they get themselves voted in, they sit down and they get down to business and start, running the cities. And so the people of St. Petersburg, the people of Moscow strongly support the Soviets. And so the Soviets have a lot of power, right? They have a lot of leverage. And so Lenin and his Bolsheviks are promising that he will, if he gets into power, he will give all power to the Soviets, right? So he's going to make them legitimate and make them kind of the real administrators of their cities, not just, the sort of illegitimate power that they are, right? He'll make them into a real power. So we said that on the 28th of October, the Bolsheviks seize their moment. They storm the Winter Palace. They arrest all the members of the provisional government, throw them in jail, and whoosh, just like that, Lenin and the Bolsheviks are in charge of Russia. And so I asked you yesterday, is this really a communist revolution? Did the capitalist proletariat overthrow the bourgeoisie and take control of the means of production? Is that what happened? Because that's what Marx said should happen, right? Marx says this is what happens in a communist revolution, but did it happen in this case? Hello? It didn't happen? It didn't happen? No, it didn't happen, right? So this isn't a peasant uprising. What is this actually? Yeah, it's a coup d'état, as they say in French, right? It's an overthrow of the state, and so by armed revolutionaries, right? So Lenin and his Bolsheviks go in with guns, right? They storm the Winter Palace. They hold everybody up at gunpoint and put them in jail. So again, this is not communist uprising. This is not class consciousness like Marx says. This is an overthrow of the state by a communist party. And so instead of communism kind of rising up from the bottom, instead it's going to come from the top down. And as we'll see, that's going to create a few issues, but we'll deal with that in due course. So before we go any further, I'd like to talk a little bit about the revolution itself and its significance and its consequences. Because again, this is one of the things that historians are, this is one of their jobs, right, is figuring out why things happened the way they did, right? And not only that, to kind of sometimes imagine how things could have turned out differently, right? So we said that, when we talked about World War I think I asked you, what if Franz Ferdinand did not get killed, right? What if I said, he went on his little motorcade that day, the Black Hand had their, murder plot with their grenades, and what if, the plot was a failure, it got totally screwed up, and Franz Ferdinand escaped and never got shot? Would a world war still have occurred? And I think so Ahmad's saying no. I think Aliana was saying yes. It's tough to know for sure, but there were a lot of other things happening in the background, right? So Franz Ferdinand's death was just one thing, right? There was that alliance system, there was militarism. What was that?
Franz Ferdinand's death was like a little spark, lit the fire.
Yeah, Ferdinand's death was a little spark, right? But the fire was set to go off anyway, right? And so again, if Franz Ferdinand hadn't have been killed, yes, maybe the war doesn't start exactly at that time, but maybe there's another spark, right? Maybe there's something else that sets it off. And so, but that's what historians try to do, right? They try to figure out, they try to put these things in context and say, how important is the murder of Franz Ferdinand in the beginning of World War I, right? Could it have started another way? Was it bound to happen anyway, and Franz Ferdinand just happened to be the thing that set it off? This is one of the things that historians kind of explore. And so what I'd like to do to this end is read a little article called What If? What if the Russian Revolution had never happened? And so in this article, it talks a little bit about the revolution itself. So it's got some detail that we haven't heard about yet. But it also tries to imagine a 20th century without the Russian Revolution. And as you'll read, it's pretty interesting how significant this revolution is to basically every player in 20th century history. So what I'll do is I'll give you some time to read here. I'll give you some time to read and then we'll talk about it, because that's normally what we do, right? Let me just see. So the article itself is in Microsoft Teams, as it usually is. And let me just have a quick look at it to remind myself how long it is. Okay. So I will give you so there's 4 questions here. I will give you 12 minutes. 12 minutes to read, and then we can talk, okay? Okay, good people. Are you ready to talk about some of this? No? Are you still reading? Or are you on Instagram? Answering questions? Okay. 2 more minutes? Okay, 2 more minutes. Okay, now can we talk? Please, please, please talk to me. Okay. So kind of an interesting article. It's a little bit, again, it's a little bit speculative, right? Because it's asking, well, what if this didn't happen? And, it's impossible to know what would have happened if something else didn't happen, right? So there's some speculation here. There's some imagination happening. There's also lots of fancy wording. This author, whoever they are, who's the author here? Simon Sebag Montefiore. Okay, so Simon's got kind of a fancy name, and he likes to use some fancy wording as well. So hopefully, we're not too lost by that. But let's start with this one. What aspects of kind of the modern world does the author see kind of a legacy of Lenin? Everything? Well, what in particular?
So he said if there wasn't any Lenin, there wouldn't have been any Hitler, there wouldn't have been any
Yeah, but that's true. But the question I'm trying to ask is, where does he see like a reflection of Lenin himself in the modern world? What's that? Did he say something about Trump? What did he say? He mentioned someone close to Trump.
yeah, his lead campaign strategist.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Leninist.
So Trump's campaign strategist from the last election, not this one, but the last one, Steve Bannon, says, "I am a Leninist." What does that mean?
He's a follower of Lenin's ideology.
Right, and what kind of ideology is that? Huh? No. No, Bannon's not a communist. Bannon's not a communist.
But like Lenin's aggressiveness.
Yeah, he's more here. Here we're talking about Lenin as like a political operator, right? And what do we kind of learn about Lenin as a leader and a politician? What's he like?
Violent, aggressive.
Yeah, it sounds like he's very aggressive. He's very comfortable using violence, right? A revolution without firing squads is meaningless. Yikes. So if you want to have a good revolution, you need to line people up and shoot them by firing squad, right? So that doesn't sound like a very friendly, agreeable kind of guy, right? What else do we learn about kind of Lenin's persona? Like the way he operates. What does it say?
He commits monstrosities and he justifies them by what they call ideal victory, something like that. Victorious idealism justified by monstrosity.
Yeah. There's and I think he says this. He says there's a kind of an ends justifies the means kind of approach here, right? And so what they're trying to say here is that, you know, when you're judging whether something is ethical or moral, how do you judge it? Do you judge it based on the things that you do, or do you just judge it by the end result? Right? And so if it's an ends justify the means situation, then yeah, anything you do in the pursuit of your success or your greater good, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's the goal that matters, right? It's that Russia becomes a communist country, right? And anything that has to happen to create that situation, it's fine, right? Because the end goal is what's important, right? But the opposite of that is, no, actually the means do matter, right? It doesn't just matter what your goal is in achieving it, it actually matters how you get there, right? And you can't do a bunch of wrong things and bad things and then expect that, you know, just because something good comes of it, that all of those bad things are now okay or forgiven, right? But for Lenin, it doesn't matter, right? Lenin will use people, right? He mentions useful idiots. He will use people, he will murder people. He will use something they mention in the article here, disinformatia, right? Disinformatia. It's the earlier Russian version of fake news. Yeah. So it's disinformation, right? It's wrong information, misleading, propaganda, fake news, right? So again, Trump didn't invent this. It's been going on for a long time, all the way back to Lenin, who's very comfortable using conspiracies and fake news in order to advance his purposes. So Trump's campaign strategist is a Leninist. That doesn't sound like a very good thing. Who else is kind of compared to Lenin? Putin is? In what way?
I think that they said that they're both backed up by their secret police. Like Lenin by the secret police and Putin by the former KGB officer.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think we could probably see that both of them are kind of ruthless political operators behind the scenes, right? And they're very comfortable using disinformatia, right? Disinformation, conspiracies, violence, scheming and planning, executing people that oppose you or poisoning them. Who else is compared to Lenin? Steve Bannon is, for sure. Did they mention Jeremy Corbyn?
Yes, the British guy.
Yeah, the British guy. Yeah, so he was the leader of a major British political party whose name escapes me. I'm not sure if it's Labour or not. Probably not.
Workers' Party.
Was it Workers' Party?
I know they have a Workers' Party.
Might have been the Workers' Party. Although I think he was defeated pretty clearly in the last election. So I'm not sure if Jeremy stepped down from party leadership. But yeah. So the leader of one of Britain's major political parties is being compared to Lenin. Is that a good thing? No, right? So being compared to Lenin is probably not something you want to be if you're a kind of a nice, normal person. Um, Okay, I have other questions I'd like to ask you, but maybe we'll take a little bit of a break because we've been working hard. So take a 10-minute break, come back. We'll talk a little bit about modern events and things like that, and then a few other questions as well, okay? So take a break, relax. Okay, peoples, and we are back. So we learned a little bit about what Lenin is like, right? And again, he's a pretty shrewd political operator, but he's also a pretty ruthless kind of guy, right? And will use any means necessary to achieve his goals, even murdering his opponents, right? Which is not good. So again, if you're a leader in the Western world, you do not want to be really compared to this kind of ruthless, this ruthless political leader, but people still are. Let's go to number 2 here. So in what ways was the Bolshevik Revolution unlikely to succeed? Yeah. Well, okay. So the Romanov monarchy was decaying quickly. Okay, so that's true. How does that make the revolution unlikely to succeed?
They said something that the Romanov didn't do was that they missed every chance for
Reform?
yeah.
Yeah, that's true, right? So even though the monarchy was kind of falling apart, unfortunately they had a lot of opportunities to reform, to turn things around, but they never do, right? Tsar Nicholas is kind of consumed with the war effort, or maybe he's just not that interested in helping the little people. Maybe the little people should help themselves, or who knows what he was thinking. And so, yeah, they have lots of opportunities to reform, but they don't. But in what ways was it unlikely to succeed? Because the author is kind of making an argument here, right? A little mini argument. The author is saying that actually this was not an inevitable event, right? So I was trying to sort of make a connection between World War I, and I was trying to say that World War I probably would have been an inevitable event. There was lots of pressure building, and then we had that little spark with Franz Ferdinand. But here, the author is saying, yeah, this wasn't inevitable. This wasn't bound to happen. It's kind of a weird thing. So in what ways was it unlikely to succeed?
Any intervention by the Western forces would have swept the Bolshevik army away.
Okay. That happens a little bit later, so I'm going to come back to you in a second because there's a civil war that happens after Lenin takes power that we haven't actually mentioned yet, and that's what the author's talking about. There's the Bolsheviks, the Red Army, and then there's a White Army that fights them, and so that's kind of what they're talking about. But I don't know. Maybe we should just deal with it now that now that we've said so much. It's true. So after the Bolsheviks take power, a group of people band together to try to remove them from power, right? And so there are people in this group. This is called the White Army. The White Army is composed of people who were loyal to the Tsar and kind of want the Tsar back, people who are loyal to the provisional government and want the provisional government back. They have some foreign assistance because there's foreign countries who don't want Lenin in power either. And so it's kind of this collection of people who are not necessarily aligned in what they want, but they just want to get rid of Lenin and the Bolsheviks, right? So they kind of ally together and fight the Bolsheviks. But as the author mentions, and as Mohammed mentions here, they aren't successful, right? They can't manage to agree on anything. They can't manage to put any good strategy together, and they lose, right? So they could have had the opportunity to kick the Bolsheviks out during this civil war that follows the revolution, but the White Army loses, right? What else? Other ways in which the Bolshevik Revolution.
So you mentioned that he was shot at.
Yeah.
Had he died, then everything would have been different. But yeah.
Right. So he kind of got lucky. He was giving a speech. Somebody took a shot at him, and he doesn't die, right? Miraculously. What else? Other ways in which it is unlikely to succeed. Lenin is almost shot, but survives. The White Army isn't successful in kicking the Bolsheviks out after the revolution. What else?
If the Romanovs lived out until 1918, the gains of the victory may have turned everything around.
Right. So Russia is pulled out of the war in 1917 by Lenin, right? And so when he leaves the war, he actually manages to make a bad deal with the Germans. So they have this treaty, which you might remember, called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and it is the sort of peace treaty between Germany and Russia. Russia has to give up a lot of land and resources in this agreement, and so it's not really a great deal for Russia. But at the time, Lenin is just trying to get them out of the war so that they can focus on other things. And so it's possible that if they never left the war, yes, more men would have died, but maybe they would have actually got to keep that territory, right? Maybe the Treaty of Versailles, they would have been part of the negotiations, they would have got a bunch of their land back, maybe they would have got reparations, who knows, but they would have been in a better position at the end of the war if they could have just hung on a little longer, right? But unfortunately, Lenin gets into power and removes them from the war, which is what he promised to do and what the Russians wanted. Other ways in which it was unlikely to succeed. There's at least three more. There's at least three more.
They mentioned that the government had the chance to find him and kill him before he made his revolution, but they didn't.
Right. So when Lenin comes back, he's kind of rallying his Bolsheviks and speaking and getting the support of the Soviets. And the author says, you know, really, he was an enemy of the state, and the provisional government knew it. That's why they exiled him in the first place. And maybe it would have been a good idea for them to hunt him down and arrest him or kill him at the time. But for whatever reason, they don't manage to do that. What else? I think there's still three more.
I just said it was two.
What, no, I know, but I forgot about that one. So there was actually four. Now there's still three.
So if the Germans didn't really put him on the train, nothing would have happened anyway. He
Oh.
would have still been in Switzerland or Finland or whatever.
Right. So he's sent back in by the Germans, right? Because they mention he's in Switzerland. He's in Zurich, right? And at the same time, they mention, where's Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, another prominent Bolshevik.
He's in New York.
Trotsky's in New York.
Stalin was
Joseph Stalin's in Siberia, right? So the author says that there's this critical moment, right, where the Tsar steps down, and maybe this is the moment for him to swoop in and take power, but where are all the head Bolsheviks? Well, none of them are even in Russia, right? So there's this moment where the Tsar steps down, maybe there's nobody in power and he can sneak in, but that might have been the ideal time for the revolution, but no, nobody's even in Russia, right? Lenin is in Switzerland, Trotsky's in America, Stalin is in Siberia.
Siberia, part of Russia.
I'm not sure what Stalin was doing out there, but he's not from there. Maybe he's I don't know. I don't know what he was doing. Yeah, I'm not sure what he was doing out there at the time. But either way, nobody is really in position to swoop in and take power when the Tsar steps down. So kind of, oops, it's almost as if they missed their moment, right? But they seem to find another one. What else? Two more. There's two more reasons why the Bolshevik Revolution was unlikely to succeed. Give you a hint. Has to do with the Winter Palace and the storming of it
They didn't really storm it.
by the Bolsheviks. They didn't really storm it?
Yes, they said that, well, it was like road around it.
It was like,
Storming.
it was okay.
Yeah. Storming the Winter Palace, how could that have been like a point where
No, they got drunk after. The Bolsheviks got drunk. So they said so storming, okay, if you ever overthrow the state, people, if you ever overthrow the state and you take control of the government buildings with weapons, you really want to do it quickly, right? You want the element of surprise. You want to swoop in while nobody's expecting you, hold everyone up, and then whisk them away to jail, right? You don't want that process to take 4 or 5 days, right? Because you lose the element of surprise, and the longer it takes, the lower your chances of success are. You've really got to be organized and swoop in there, grab everybody at the same time, totally surprise them so that they can't defend themselves, and then whisk them off to prison, right? But again, that's not really what happens here. The Bolsheviks manage to take some buildings because they're not very well guarded, and then they, get drunk and have a party in celebration. But then other buildings take days and days to conquer. And again, the longer you're doing this, the more your chances of success decline, right? So they kind of, their storming the castle skills are a little questionable here, right? And maybe they shouldn't have succeeded, but they do. What else? I think there's one more.
Just one question.
Yes.
The Habsburgs, were they the Germans?
Habsburgs are Austrian.
What were the Germans?
I don't know. One more. One more. Lenin had to convince some people of something. Who did Lenin have to convince of what? He had to what? Nope. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There's just one more. When he got back from exile, when he came back, what did the Bolshevik Party actually want to do? What was their plan?
They did hold an election.
Yes, but what was the Bolshevik Party planning to do in relation to the provisional government? Were they going to overthrow it, like Lenin wanted?
The Bolsheviks, the rest of the party wanted to keep it and cooperate. They didn't want to.
Yeah. So Lenin comes back. He talks to his Bolshevik Party, and they're like, "Yeah, we think we're gonna try and cooperate with this provisional government to achieve our goals." And Lenin's like, "That's ridiculous, right? We're going to have a revolution." So he's got to convince everyone that overthrowing the state is the right thing to do. And it's possible that he might not have been successful in that as well, right? He might not have gotten his way. Turns out he did, but might not have. So again, the author is making an argument, right? So he's saying the Bolshevik Revolution was unlikely to succeed. Why? Well, because at the opportune moment, no one was in Russia. When Lenin finally came back, his party didn't want to overthrow the state. They wanted to cooperate, and he had to convince them. He almost got shot and died himself. Even after the revolution was successful, a white army, not an army of white people, but the white army opposed the Red Army and tried to kick them out of power, but failed because they weren't very organized. And so this revolution had all kinds of chances to fail. And kind of by, I guess, a stroke of luck or serendipity or whatever you want to say, somehow Lenin's Bolsheviks managed to hang on to power and impose their communist system on Russia. So according to the author, in what ways would the world be different if the Russian Revolution never took place?
They mentioned a lot of stuff going on in the east of Europe that happened. Like the Koreans, North Korea, who would have been they were facing all the struggles.
Sure.
Mao guy from China, he wouldn't have gotten to power.
Right. So Mao doesn't get into power, and China doesn't become a communist country, because the Soviet Union is a pretty significant supporter of Mao and of the People's Republic of China once it's declared. So no Soviet Union, probably no communist China, right? Who knows what China would look like today, but it wouldn't look like it currently does, right? And of course, North Korea has been supported and propped up by communist China since 1950, right? The original invasion of the southern part of Korea, which we'll get to, I hope, is who's the dictator of Korea now? I always mix up their names. Kim Jong-un, and his father, Kim Il-sung, is heavily supported by communist China. And so no communist China, no support for Kim Il-sung, no North Korea as we currently know it, right? What else? What else doesn't happen? Yeah, no Vietnam War, right? Because the Vietnam War, which we'll get to again, is Ho Chi Minh, inspired by Marxist communism, kind of invading and trying to take over the whole of Vietnam, and of course the Americans going in to oppose that communist expansion. But no Soviet Union to inspire Ho Chi Minh, maybe no Vietnam War, or maybe Ho Chi Minh does, try to take all of Vietnam, but maybe the Americans don't care, right? The only reason the Americans really cared is that it was kind of a domino in terms of Soviet domination, but no Soviet Union, no Cold War.
Because they have lost so many soldiers already in Vietnam. I think that is it worth it?
We'll get to it. We'll get to it. But arguably, without a Soviet Union and a Cold War, most Americans don't know where Vietnam is, and so maybe no Vietnam War, at least maybe one with no American involvement anyway. What else doesn't happen? There's no Cold War. There's no nuclear arms race. There's no space race. Maybe nobody goes to space, right? The Americans were working so hard to put a man in space and put a man on the moon because they didn't want the Russians to get there first. If the Russians don't try and get there first, maybe nobody goes.
They did get there first.
Russians got into space first. Americans got to the moon.
But that's the conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I know.
Of the way, how the flag is, moving in the moon. There's no air in it.
It's a conspiracy theory. What else? Do you have any idea what that means? See, this is why you got to be careful when you quote things in your papers. If you don't know what something means, don't quote it. Not prestige, it's pastiche. Yeah. I think it is. I think it means that it's kind of a. It's like it's like an impression of something or a copy of something, but a not very good copy. I think it's not a very common word. Right. So he says that Kim Jong-un is kind of a Joseph Stalin wannabe, but of course with no Joseph Stalin, nobody wants to be him. I don't know why anyone would want to be him anyway, but that's another story. What other things don't happen? Right? No Cuba. Cuba is a communist country that's supported by Soviet Union. Probably no communist Cuba. No Hitler. There's a big one. Why no Hitler?
Because apparently all the nobles and the aristocrats have fled from Russia, went to some place like Germany, and they were really, really afraid of Bolshevism, so they backed Hitler up.
No World War II, no German.
Maybe not, right? So Hitler was using the fear of Bolshevism, of a communist revolution, to sort of gain power in Germany. And I'm not sure if this is true, but the author's trying to make this argument that if there's no fear of Bolshevism, then maybe Hitler doesn't gain power, right? If Hitler doesn't gain power, maybe no World War II, right? Certainly the Treaty of Versailles negotiations would have gone pretty differently if the Soviet Union or if Russia was at the table, maybe the
We would
maybe,
have more population, more Jews.
yeah, but yeah, it's hard to know, right? It's impossible to,
You know, because of
yeah, like what is the 20th century without World War II and the Cold War and, you know, all of these communist countries and nuclear arms, and all of that comes out of the Cold War and the Soviet Union. And so without it, yeah, like it's almost impossible to imagine what the 20th century looks like. And again, that 20th century sets up the century that we're currently in. And so what does that look like? Again, probably the most powerful countries on the planet now are the US and Russia and China, and maybe India as well. But you know, China's a communist country, and so without that communist switch in 1949, what kind of country is China without the Soviet Union and communism? I don't know. Russia. There's no Putin. There's no Putin without Russia, or there's no without the Soviet Union. And so,
US wouldn't have not that much power because of the fighting with the Soviet. They got the power.
who didn't have power?
US.
Oh, it's possible,
Yeah,
right?
because they wouldn't be the dominating one.
Yeah, the U.S. built up its military very significantly during the Cold War in order to oppose Russia. And so without a Russia to oppose, maybe the U.S. isn't the dominant military power on the planet. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Or maybe it is. It's really hard to know, right? Because there's so many like,
All of them.
yeah, there's so many big puzzle pieces of the 20th century that without this event, none of them happen. And again, the author is pointing out that it's kind of a bit of a fluke that this happened in the first place, because there was just so many things that could have gone wrong and probably should have gone wrong for the Bolsheviks, but somehow they managed to do it, right? Somehow they managed to pull off their revolution. Okay, last question. So they say at the end of the article, they say, this article's a couple years old now, 3 years old, and they say that the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution was coming up, right? Because the date on the article is, it's actually November 6th. So this is actually after the revolution, or after the anniversary. But it was the 100-year revolution or anniversary of the Russian Revolution, and Russia didn't say anything about it. They didn't celebrate it. There was no speeches. There was nothing on TV.
But then, why didn't they celebrate?
What's that?
So why didn't they celebrate it?
That's the question I'm asking you. Why didn't they celebrate it? We celebrate Canada Day every year, right? The anniversary of Canada becoming a country. But this is a pretty big event, right? I think we've just established how important the Russian Revolution is. And then on the 100th anniversary of this incredibly important event, the country that it happens to says nothing. They just go on with their regular day.
They don't even have a holiday.
There's no holiday for that in Russia. There's Russia Day, which I think is June 7th or something. There's Russia Day. There's like a military day, which is May 9th.
Do you still have friends from Russia?
Not that I'm in contact with, but it's been a long time. But why are they not?
Well, it's a big deal for them.
Well, because they're trying to deny, they don't want to, they mentioned that Putin was trying to do, he's trying to build up everything from the Glorious victory against the Germans in 1945 instead of the revolution of 1917.
Right.
So they want to make the 19th.
Pretending it never happened. Yeah, it says Russia's pretending it never happened.
Yeah, but why are they pretending it never happened? It's pretty important. So it says that Putin is kind of building his narrative about Russia more based on World War II victory, right? But also what else? What other things does Putin kind of prefer to think about? with regard to Russia? What does he prefer to think about? Hmm? Yes. What parts of Russia's history does Putin prefer to pay attention to?
Where did the good part
The
of the victorious
yeah. I'll tell you what. This one we'll talk about tomorrow. Okay? So that's it for today. Come back tomorrow. We will we'll review this, we'll answer the last question, and then we'll go on and talk about Joseph Stalin, or Uncle Joe, as his friends called him.
Yeah, you don't really want to call him Uncle Joe. Many theories actually.
He wanted people to call him Uncle Joe.
Wanted people?
Yes.
They end up in some place like
No. He wanted people to see him as warm and fuzzy, even though he very much was not. Okay, that is all for today. Don't forget, we're going to have a quiz on Monday, like we said yesterday. It'll be on classes 21 to 30, and I'll put that in Microsoft Teams today. And your paper's due on Friday, right? Yes. You're not a very good liar. Okay, that's all for today, people. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.